I'm so thankful for my friend Bethany King, who's here today. I love this woman. She is incredible. And if you remember Uriah, some of you remember Pastor Uriah, our youth pastor, young adult pastor. And we went down. And Tim, I don't know if you're watching online, but we took quite a few of our young adults down. And so I saw this incredible ministry down in Colombia, and Bethany's going to share today. But I know it's all a miracle, I was reading up on your story of On the Ground International, and really this is a big God thing. And so thank you for being here, Bethany.
Thank you,
we love you.
All right, good morning. Ben Church, it's so great to be here again. I was here briefly 2 years ago and gave like a mission spotlight, 10-minute kind of stories from Colombia. So some of you might remember that, and some of today's will be repeat. But I just want to tell you about the ministry that I run in Colombia. And then actually most of what I want to talk about today is my backstory of how I got into refugee work in the first place. So starting with, Venezuela is the top country of South America. And I started adding these map pictures after so many people would comment on, oh, that's a great story from Africa, or how was your time in Africa? So this is just to give you a visual where Venezuela and Colombia are. I'm working with Venezuelan refugees, but I live in Colombia. So the top two countries there, the top of South America. And I just want to paint a picture for you of what's happening in Venezuela, because it hasn't gotten a lot of news coverage. So there's not a lot of awareness of the Venezuelan crisis. But Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in the world for many years because it's the most oil-rich nation in the world. So there's more oil in the ground in Venezuela than anywhere else. So they export a lot of oil. We're very wealthy. Here is a picture of the capital of Venezuela, Caracas, very advanced modern city. Venezuela also has a lot of natural beauty and tourism, Venezuelan beaches and islands that were very popular tourist destinations for many years. This is Angel Falls. This is the highest waterfall in the world, also in Venezuela. Unfortunately, Venezuela hit hard times when they got a pretty evil, corrupt government that began nationalizing the industries, including the oil industry. So they nationalized the oil industries with people who didn't know how to run oil, not business people. And in 2015, the annual production of oil dropped from $51 billion to $1 billion in 1 year. So they had a $50 billion deficit in a country of 30 million people. So per person, this is a huge loss. And this led to people leaving the country and massive food shortages. In that first year, the food shortages were so severe that the average Venezuelan lost 19 pounds. Inflation happens when governments run out of money. They tend to print more. So I brought with me some Venezuelan money. This is beautiful currency, now basically worthless. So here is 10,000 bolivars. I have 20,000 bolivars, 5 bolivars. Inflation increased in 1 year to 800%, the following year to 4,000%, and then it peaked in 2018 with an inflation of 63,000%. So I got to speak at the school, at Three Sisters Adventist School yesterday, and the way I usually explain inflation to students is in terms of Taco Bell burritos, because I like Taco Bell. So I told them, look, if your Taco Bell burrito is $1, because I remember back in the day when you could get a Taco Bell burrito for 89 cents. So let's say in 2015, it cost $1. In 2016, that burrito cost $800. In 2017, it cost $4,000. And then in 2018, this burrito now costs $63,000. Now, how many of you guys are buying burritos at Taco Bell anymore? None of us are buying burritos at Taco Bell, right? So this money, the walkers, we call them, our refugees, come through with stacks of this cash, and they actually this is made out of Venezuelan currency. So this purse, and they have origami pieces. A walker gave me this origami star made out of Venezuelan money. They make animals and houses, and then try to sell that on their journey. So you guys can look at this afterwards if you'd like. Even if you have a lot of money, oh no, technology, okay. So in order to go grocery shopping, this is a visual of how much cash it would take to buy basic food items in Venezuela. So you have to take a suitcase of cash. 2,500,000 bolivars will buy a pound of rice. 2 pounds of tomatoes is 5 million bolivars. And toilet paper, 2,600,000 bolivars. So what do you think they use for toilet paper instead of toilet paper? They'll use the bills, because why would you trade in that big stack of money or this big stack of paper for a little roll of paper? Even if you have suitcases full of bolivars, this is what the grocery store shelves look like. So there's not, as the supply chain has broken down, goods are not able to be transported. So sometimes there's just ketchup and tea for sale. So what happens when things get this bad is that people start leaving. So this picture was taken about a month before I arrived. The same month that I arrived in Colombia, which was March of 2019, they had just closed the land border to vehicles. So at that point, it was only, these are the last couple of vehicles that got across the border. And then when I arrived, I took this picture in March of 2019, and this is the line to cross the border into Colombia. So to Colombia's credit, other than a couple months during COVID, Colombia has never closed its borders to Venezuela, which around the world is amazing, because usually when there's a refugee crisis in a country, the first thing all the neighboring countries do is close their borders and try to keep people out and deport people. The Colombian government has said over and over, these are our brothers, they helped us in our time of need, we won't turn our backs on them, they're welcome in our country. So that has been the national stance. Venezuelans are welcome to enter Colombia. Having said that, on an individual level, there is a lot of tension between Colombians and Venezuelans. And when the crisis started 10 years ago and Venezuelans were coming into the country, the local Colombians would give them bread, say, hey, come sleep in my living room. But at some point, compassion fatigue sits in. And at some point, even the best people in the world are tired of opening their door every day and seeing homeless people sleeping on their porch. And at some point, if you live close to the border, you've seen all kinds of Venezuelans. Most of them wonderful people that just happen to be in a desperate spot. But we get all kinds of people. So there are aggressive people or people with malintentions. As soon as you've run into one of those Venezuelans, that in your mind is all Venezuelans. So there is a lot of tension between the two groups that we deal with on an individual level. This is the map of the aid situation when I arrived in Colombia. So I was actually working in a refugee camp in Greece and planning to stay there. I had quit my job as a music teacher, and I started reading articles about Venezuela every day. And finally, I was like, well, I speak Spanish already. I had lived in Honduras for a year. I'm more familiar with the culture. It's in my hemisphere. There are all these practical, logical reasons for me to go to Colombia. So I looked at the map and I said, okay, Cucuta, that's on the border. I bet there are refugees there. And I looked around for some organizations providing aid, didn't really find anything. I thought, I'm sure there are people helping. They're on the ground already. They're just not big enough yet. It was the beginning of the crisis, so they're not big enough yet to have a website or to have be organized. I'll just go and find them. It'll be hard, but I'll figure it out. And so I arrived in Cucuta, flaming hot, that first day in March. And the first day I remember thinking, oh, okay, I'm here now, and it's hard. I don't know what to do. So I spent 3 or 4 days just walking around the city and talking to whoever wanted to chat, Colombians, Venezuelans. You can read something in the news, but then it's often different when it's firsthand with the people who are actually experiencing it. So I just asked them, what's your story? How did you get here? Or what has your experience been in the last couple of years with this influx of Venezuelans? And then I found this map buried really deep in a Facebook forum. I pretended I was a refugee looking for aid, and I found this map. And I said, okay, we need to visit these shelters. This is a map of about 500 miles between the border and the capital of Bogota. Most of these shelters are now closed. About 6 of these shelters are still open. By the time there were these 16. And so I then spent 4 months traveling back and forth up and down this route and finding the shelters. And often it was hard because they're not labeled. It's often just someone's house, or it's some shelters built on a hillside. It's not even a formal dwelling. And I have to ask around town and wander around, and oh, it's actually 20 miles outside of town. I have to try to find a ride there. But I spent 4 months volunteering in different shelters and seeing firsthand, like, what do we actually need? What are the needs here? And at that point in 2019, there were thousands of people crossing the border every day. And in the town of Pamplona, where I'm now based, we had 500 or 600 new refugees arriving every day in a very small town. So while I was there, I was posting a lot of pictures on social media and sending email updates, and people started sending me money. And it started being a lot of money that I felt strange having it go through my personal accounts. So my dad helped me set up a bank account, a nonprofit, just to have a bank account to funnel donations. Because still in my head, I was thinking, this is a 3-month trip, I'm not staying. But I thought, whatever donations I'll get, I'll make sure that they're spent well, and then I'll go back. I was planning to go back to the Middle East and work with refugees there. So people started sending me money, and then I started getting people on Instagram writing and asking if they could volunteer with me. And I was like, I guess, like if you, I don't know what I would do with a volunteer. I mean, if you want to come, like, sure. And so we ended up with 5 people. My sister came down for 4 months, and then I had 5 people that I didn't know, one from Norway and from Canada and from the US, that all showed up at the same time. And the first day I was like, okay, we can go to the shelter and see if they need help with something. I don't know. And it just got more and more. It was trial and error a lot at the beginning. We say, here's a need, here are resources, how can we make the two meet, what can we do? And every project, we now have children's projects. We teach English classes in the local school. We run clinics. And this is our team in January. I now have 4 coordinators who each manage one section, one project, and they commit to 6 months at a time. Our volunteers come from 3 weeks to 3 months. The last 3 years, I've had student missionaries from Walla Walla come for 6 months or 9 months, and that's been really special for me because I was a student missionary when I was in college. And so it's been really beautiful to get to provide that opportunity for other students. And this is the town that we live in. This is Pamplona. It's a cute little colonial town nestled in the Andes Mountains. There's a university there, so a lot of young people, a very fun vibe. And these are the mountains. So that's the town at the base of the mountains. And there's hikes in every direction out our front door. Okay, so briefly, I just want to run through some of our projects. The main thing we do is we have 2 of our own shelters, and then we support the local shelters. So this would be a typical evening in Vanessa's shelter, which is in Pamplona, the town we're based in. And the refugees arrive after 8 to 10 to 12 hours of walking. We feed them dinner. We separate women and children are upstairs, men are downstairs, and then they usually sleep pretty hard. We get them up at 6 in the morning, and they're off on the road again. The volunteers help with food prep. This is lunch in our La Laguna shelter. Sometimes if they're walking throughout the day, they'll just come and eat lunch, and then they'll continue walking. And the refugees we refer to as, they're called caminantes in Spanish. Caminar is the verb to walk. So we literally call them walkers. This is the term that the locals have started calling them. Every night we have a children's program in Vanessa's shelter. Sometimes there are 2 kids, sometimes there are 20 kids. We never know how many are going to show up. Sometimes they're too tired to do anything. They just want to sit on the mats. And sometimes they're bouncing off the walls. They want to sing songs. We do a lot of coloring. The girls love getting their nails painted. They'll teach us little songs, little Spanish nursery rhymes or games. And usually this is a favorite project of our volunteers, is getting to know the kids. And then we run clinics. So we're always looking for medical volunteers, obviously physicians and nurses, but also EMTs and PTs, because we see a lot of basic wounds care that EMTs are great for, and then a lot of people with walking injuries, with stress injuries to their knees and ankles that PTs are very helpful for. And we see a lot of kids with chronic ear infections or like a cough that they just haven't been able to get rid of for 3 months because they're walking and they're sleeping outside, and all the kids have diarrhea. They're all drinking the river water. So we do a basic parasite meds with all the kids that come through. And we see a lot of pregnant women and a lot of older people, a lot of people in their 70s and 80s that are leaving the country for the first time. Mobile aid, this is one of the favorite projects of our volunteers. Every morning we'll make 100, 500, 1,000 sandwiches, however many we think we need for the day. And Brent got to help with this, I believe. He made some sandwiches while he was with us. And then we load up 2 cars with sandwiches, boiled eggs, oranges, bananas, Gatorade, water, socks, diapers, and then travel along the route and stop and feed and talk to the groups that we meet. Because often they have false information. They think the next shelter is a mile away when actually it's another 15 miles, or they think they're going to get a ride. A lot of them arrive across the border thinking that they're going to be able to hitchhike really easily or get a ride on a truck, and some of them do. They're able to grab onto the back of a truck and ride. But since there are so many Venezuelans, it's much harder than they think, so they end up walking. Most of them are underprepared. They're coming in flip-flops. They have shorts. The top of the Berlin Pass is 12,000 feet elevation. Where we live is 8,000 feet. So they come, a lot of them come to clinic thinking that they have asthma, and they ask for inhalers when actually it's just altitude sickness, or they've never experienced elevation before. So we do a lot of information. Even on the route, we'll explain to them, you need to drink lots of water. Here's the next point. And often, like, we'll give them a water bottle and say, you have to keep this and refill it, because they view a water bottle as you drink it and you throw it out, and then they have nothing. They're walking for miles and miles with no way to carry water. We see a lot of young families, a lot of women and children. So what happens is often this family got to travel together, but often the man of the house leaves 6 months before in the hopes of finding a job and sending money back to his family so that they won't have to walk. And then he's in Colombia for 6 months. It's really hard to find work. It's really hard just to sustain yourself, much less save money. So then 6 months later, the wife and kids end up traveling on their own, which is much more dangerous. But we see a lot of groups of women and children. And we also see a lot of groups of, once again, technology. We also see a lot of groups of 14, 15, 16-year-old boys, unaccompanied minors, and they're the most vulnerable population because legally we can't let them into our shelter. They do sleep in our shelter at times because when it's 0 degrees and they come in, and I'm not going to tell them to go sleep in the street, but legally if the police arrived, we would get in trouble. Because they can be classified as trafficked persons, and it is a very vulnerable situation if you have 14, 15-year-old boys traveling with a group of adult men. But usually it's, their family is struggling in Venezuela, they can't get work in Venezuela, so they're off on their own in the hopes of finding a job or finding a new opportunity in Colombia. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier, most of our refugees are staying in Colombia. They're trying to get to the capital, which is about a 1-month walk. From Cucuta to Bogota, it takes them about a month. It would take 18 hours in a bus, and it costs about $32, but they don't have $32, so they walk for a month. And then some of them are going on into Ecuador, Peru, Chile. If they're walking to Chile, it takes about 6 months. So there are some refugees who are arriving at the US border. Those refugees pass a different point. They don't go by our route, and they have to have $500 to $1,000 at least to be able to pay for the smugglers to get from Colombia to Panama and then to get all the way up through Central America. So the people that we are seeing are people who have absolutely nothing left. They're walking for a month because they don't have $32 bus passage. So this shelter, La Laguna Shelter, there's a soft spot in my heart for this shelter. This is the first shelter that we opened on our own, and I had spent 6 months trying to open a shelter. And I had been so close several times. I had signed a contract, and I'd even paid the first 2 months' rent and deposit on a building, and then it still fell through. So by the time we were working with this one, I wasn't even very emotionally invested. I was just waiting for something to go wrong. And everything seemed to click together, and we had the house, and nothing had happened yet. And so I said, okay, I guess what's happening. So we opened the shelter. And then 2 weeks later, the community was very upset with us, and they wanted to have a meeting. So La Laguna is a small farming village about an hour from Pamplona. It's up in the mountains, very cold at night, and very small community, people who have lived there forever, and their parents and their grandparents. There aren't a lot of outsiders in this town. And they were very upset about a shelter and wanted to have a meeting with us. And so we met in their school classroom, which is the biggest building in this little town. And it was me and 2 colleagues from a French NGO that I had partnered with on this shelter, and probably 20 to 25 village people. And they were very upset and very aggressive and very hateful in their verbiage. So I know there's been a lot of attention in the last couple of years on racial tensions in the US, and we have progress to be made for sure in this country. But I will say, I've seen it much worse in many places around the world. There's nothing wrong with being blatantly racist or saying really hateful things about someone who's different than you. And so we had these Colombians who were saying really terrible things about Venezuelans in general. And I actually asked my staff to leave pretty early on because I didn't want them to hear what was being said. And then I stood there for 3 hours as these people just yelled and said all these hateful things and were so unkind. And finally, we didn't really come to a lot of agreements. Finally ended the meeting, and I walked back to the shelter very discouraged and very disheartened. And I thought, God, really? Is this where we're supposed to work? When there's this much hatred? How are we supposed to do anything good when there's this much hatred and this much animosity? And I got back to the shelter, and the mood was very somber. No one really said very much. I didn't go into detail about the meeting, but my staff obviously kind of had an idea. The refugees coming in, I don't think anyone said anything specific, but everyone kind of knew that something had gone down in town that day. So everyone was just kind of quiet. And about an hour later, I heard a truck pull up to our front door, and I thought, oh, great, someone else here to complain. So I didn't go to the door. I waited for them to knock. Heard some scuffling outside, and then the car pulled away. So they never knocked on the door. So I went and opened the door, and there were 2 sacks of potatoes right there, probably 100 pounds of potatoes that they had left for us. I found that very touching. And then that night, the pastor from the small church, which he wasn't at the meeting, but he came with 3 or 4 church members and a guitar and led the walkers in about an hour of singing. And music in Colombia, they're great dancers. They do salsa dancing from the time they can walk. But the idea of pitch or key signatures is just not a cultural thing. So it's like you pick your note and then you just go for it, and everyone's on their own note. It's just kind of like a wall of sound. So they did that for about an hour, just made a joyful noise. And then the pastor got down on his knee, so got down eye level with them as they're sitting on the floor, and gave just a very short, but just very poignant, touching message. He didn't say anything about the meeting, but he said, look, guys, you are in one of the hardest periods of your life. This is one of the hardest periods of your life. And not everyone is going to understand you. You are facing incredible, tremendous obstacles, and it's not fair. Not everyone is going to understand what you're going through. Not everyone is going to understand you. Some people are going to think the worst of you. That doesn't mean that you're doing this alone. God never said that life would be easy, but he did say he would walk with you, and he's walking with you today, and he's walking with you tomorrow. And all the refugees were doing that, saying, amen, amen. And I choked up a little bit, because it was a good reminder for me, too. So then, the next morning, one of the agreements we had made with the town was that we would escort the refugees from the shelter to the outskirts of town, which was not a very long walk. But they didn't want them hanging out during the day and begging, which I said, fair enough, we can do that. So I'm walking this group of maybe 30 refugees out, and we passed the school where we'd had the meeting the day before, and I'm walking next to this maybe 8-year-old Venezuelan boy, and a little Colombian boy, probably about 8 years old also, came walking towards us wearing his plaid school uniform and his backpack, and it happened so fast, I almost missed it. But this Venezuelan kid took a chocolate bar out of his pocket and put it in the hand of the Colombian kid and never broke pace, just kept walking. So the Venezuelan kid and I looked at each other, and then I looked back at the kid, and just perfectly straight back, he just walked straight into the school. And I could have cried. I was so touched by the kindness of a child. So I walked them to the edge of the town, said goodbye, wished them well on their journey, and then walked back to the shelter, and it was just me and my staff for another hour, and I said, okay, Bethany, yesterday was really tough. It was really hard to hear all those things and to see that much hatred and animosity in the townspeople here. But there were probably only 20 people at that meeting, and there are more than 20 people living in this town. I think actually there are a lot of people here who are behind you and who are supportive of what you're doing. They're just quiet. And that's something I've continued to carry with me, that often the hateful voices feel like the majority. It might feel like everyone's against you, but it might just be a few loud people that are against you. And you might actually have more people in your corner than you're aware of. So this is a typical evening at La Laguna Shelter, the main room. It's a very small house. There's 4 bedrooms, and then the main room where we eat meals. And then if the bedrooms are all full, this is the main room. Again, they all sleep like sardines, which is warmer anyway, because it does get very cold at night. And then in the morning, they're off on their way again, and we wish them luck. The next shelter is 3 days walk from there. So after they leave our spot, we encourage them to get over the mountain pass and back down into the warmer regions, but they're kind of on their own for a bit. I could spend the rest of the day telling stories about Colombia and all the people that I've met and the things that have made me cry and the experiences I've had, but I actually want to spend I want to talk to you about my backstory of how I got into refugee work. So if you have more questions about OTGI, here's our website and our Instagram. Feel free to follow us there or ask me questions afterwards. I also have these cards are sitting out on a table there. You can take that home with you. It also has our website on it. Or if you want to leave it here, if you want to add your email to I send email updates like twice a year. So my goal is to do better, but it's about twice a year. So if you want an email every 6 months, you can put your email here. Our funding is all private donations, and that I've always been grateful for that, but I've been especially grateful for that the last 2 months, because if you followed the news back in January, the government froze all funding for U.S. aid, which does most humanitarian funding around the world. And I read through the executive order and I thought, okay, well, this won't affect us because my refugees are not heading to the U.S. They're staying south or headed south, and we don't receive any government funding, so nothing changes for us. And then the very next day, every other organization in our region closed. So overnight, we were suddenly the only ones open. And I had an hour of very panicked. How are we going to handle all the? We had twice as many people coming through our points from one day to the next, and I was very stressed for about an hour. And then I said, okay, Bethany, no, you're looking at this all wrong. What an opportunity, and what an honor, and what a privilege to not be dependent on governments or changes in policies, and to be able to be here and to be able to stand in the gap and to be right now the only ones standing in the gap. I hope that some of those NGOs will be able to come back at some point, but in the meantime, it's been 2 months. I hired a couple new full-time local staff, and our shelters were spending a lot more money on food now with the higher influx of people. But I'm really proud of my team because they've really risen to the challenge really beautifully. Okay, so transitioning, we're going to back up. Before I ever set foot in Colombia, I was a music teacher. I was teaching down in Sacramento, and very busy. As most Americans we all tend to fill our plates too full. I was teaching music and then teaching piano lessons in between my music classes and then coaching 7th and 8th grade basketball. So my days were often from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. So I didn't have time to read the news. I didn't keep in touch with what was going on in the world. But this is 2015. And so I started hearing just little snips from conversations with people, Syria, Syrian refugees, Syrian crisis, ISIS. And finally, I was like, I'd heard this enough times that I was finally like, what is going on in Syria? Like, I need to know. So I did a quick Google search, and then I ended up spending 3 hours reading articles about the Syrian refugee crisis. And I was horrified. The stories were so terrible, but I was also a little skeptical. I was like, there's no way it's really that bad. Like, this is a journalist trying to sell a story. This is propaganda, you know. I thought there's no way it's really that bad. Because if it were really that bad, if something that bad were happening in the world, we'd all be doing something about it, right? Like, of course. But it became an addiction. I started reading new articles from Syria every day, and articles kept coming, and they were terrible. And so finally, I was like, I don't know if this is true, but I am a teacher, so I do have summer break. I want to find out. Like, I want to go myself and see what's happening. So I looked at the map, and here's a map of the Middle East. There's Syria right there in the middle, and so I thought, okay, Lebanon. I'm sure there are refugees in Lebanon. So I started Googling any refugee aid organization I could find in Lebanon, and there were a lot online, and I wrote to them. Didn't hear back from anyone. Some of them sent back forms on how to donate, but nobody wrote back about volunteering. So then life was busy, basketball season, spring concerts, months went by, and finally it was March, and I thought, you know what? Tickets to Lebanon aren't going to get any cheaper. I'll just buy a ticket now and I'll figure it out later. So I bought a ticket, and then people started asking me, Bethany, what are you doing for summer? And I'd say, oh, I'm going to Lebanon. I'm going to work in a Syrian refugee camp. And I said it so confidently so many times that I think I forgot that I did not actually have any kind of plan or any kind of connections, because you can't just walk into a Syrian refugee camp. There's a lot of protocols and security checks, et cetera. But I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And the pushback I got from my community, from my friends, was really surprising to me. Almost everyone immediately say, oh, the Middle East. You're going to the Middle East. Is it safe there? Like, do you know if it's going to be safe? And I was really surprised. I thought, well, you know, I have not researched the safety statistics for foreigners in Lebanon right now, but if I feel like this is something God's calling me to do, then I'm going to do it. So I continued forward with this plan. I'm going to go to Lebanon, work in Syrian refugee camps, and the months kept going by. And then as I was telling people, again, no one ever wrote back to my emails. I never got any response. But it was from telling individual friends. My 5th grade teacher was like, oh, my son's roommate's girlfriend's cousin, like something very obscure. She worked with refugees in Turkey. Maybe she would know someone. And then another friend said, oh, I met this guy on an airplane who worked with refugees in Greece. Like, maybe he would know someone. So I connected with these 2 individuals over Facebook, and then very quickly and very last minute, things fell into place. I found 2 different organizations to volunteer with, and I was actually in the Portland airport in line to board my flight and frantically texting with this woman, a director of a school there, because I had asked her if there was a host family I could live with. And rather than paying rent to a hotel, I would rather support a local family, a refugee family. So she found me a family. So I was texting her from the airport like, oh, so I can stay with them like tonight? Perfect. So I arrived in Beirut and moved in with the Lilos, this lovely family who just adopted me right away. I felt instantly at home with them. Very simple house. There's no furniture. There was running water, but no flushing toilet, and the shower was just a bucket. And we slept on the floor, and we ate on the floor. And it's hot. Lebanon in July and August is the greatest heat I have ever experienced in my life. So it would be so hot at night, I would douse myself several buckets full of water in my clothing, and then fall asleep, and then at 1 or 2 in the morning, wake up completely dry, and then go and completely douse myself again just to be able to sleep through the night. But this family was so kind and so gracious, and I was there, and I slowly learned their story. So they were as I got to know them and built more trust, they slowly told me their story, which is so sad and yet also so typical of what so many Syrian families experienced during that time. So they were a middle to upper class family in Syria. The father was one of the top managers of a large supermarket chain, and they had a house by a lake and 100 cousins that all lived in their same town, like big families. And fighting broke out in their village, and they were like, oh, this doesn't look good. Let's go to Grandma's house, an hour away, just till the fighting dies down. We'll come back tomorrow. So they went for one night to Grandma's house. The next day, they were still fighting. So they said, we'll wait a couple days. 3 days go by, a week went by, 3 months went by. And finally, after 3 months, the father said, Syria's not getting better, we have to leave. So they never were able to go back to their home. They then spent 22 days walking and traveling by bus across Syria because there's no direct route with all the fighting zones. They kind of zigzagged their way across the country to get to Lebanon. And they expressed really extreme gratitude that they all made it together because they were stopped 18 times at the militia stops and watched as other families were torn apart as the men were taken off the bus to be forced into military service. But they said that at the time that they were traveling, the father was considered too old and the boys were considered too young. So they were all able to stay together and make it to Lebanon. So by the time I met them, they had been there for 5 years already. And as far as Syrian refugees families went, they were doing okay. The father did have a job. The kids had been at the Adventist school and so had learned English, especially the younger kids spoke English pretty well. So they were very familiar with Adventism, expressed numerous times how grateful they are to Adventists, how Adventists have saved them, and they were very open, asking me about my faith. I knew almost nothing about Islam. So I was there during Ramadan. I took my mandolin and taught the kids, this is Abdullah and Nafisa, and I taught them basic chords on the mandolin. And then I learned that the song Father Abraham is a Christian song and a Muslim song. Who knew? So that was their favorite song, Father Abraham. I was there during Ramadan, which I had heard the word Ramadan, but I didn't really know what it was. So it's one of the pillars of the Muslim faith. And they don't eat while the sun is up. And they fast all day. They don't eat or drink water. And then at night, they'll eat these big meals. So I didn't fast all day, and then I also got to feast at night with them. It worked out very well for me. And so I would ask them a lot of questions. I was very curious about Islam, and so I'd say, what does this mean? What is this for? Why do you do this? And they were very welcoming and open to share and converse. And after a couple weeks, I was asking the mother again, what does this mean? What is that for? And she stopped me. She said, Bethany, don't you have any Muslim friends in America? And I was like, well, no. I thought through, yes, I've met some Muslims here and then, but no one that I've ever gotten close to or know well. And she was like, but there are many Muslims in America. And I was like, yes. She's like, and you're not friends with any of them? And I was like, well, you see, I grew up in a Christian family, and we went to church, and most of our friends were from church, and then I went to a Christian school, and then I went to a Christian college, and now I work at a Christian school. And at some point, I didn't even finish. I just stopped talking because I realized I was a little bit ashamed. I said, yes, there are lots of Muslims in America, and I'm not friends with any of them. And just left it at that. And I've never forgotten, she just looked at me like, how is this possible? I've never forgotten that, because I do think, now when I think Muslim, I think of this family who I've stayed in touch with them, they're good friends of mine. And I think of them and the kindness and how well they loved me and how well they love everyone around them. And that's my image of Islam, of a Muslim family. I think if every Christian had a Muslim friend and every Muslim had a Christian friend, we would all be a little happier. So the second half of the summer, I went out into the camps. And the camps were just as bad as I had thought. My first day, I was like, okay, all the articles are true. All the news articles are true. And a lot of these people, they thought they were coming over for a month or two, and now it's been 5 years. They've been living in plastic tents. And during the summer, it's unbearably hot. And then during the winter, they do get snow sometimes. And water like floods through the alleys between the tents. And the kids are living in the dirt and the dust. They've been out of school for a long time, even back when they were in Syria. Often it wasn't safe to all meet in one big schoolroom, so they haven't been in school. So we'd set up, the organization I worked with had set up informal schools in the camps. And again, we used music a lot. Anything that you can set to a melody, the kids would gravitate towards. So we did basic English, basic math, and basic Arabic. The Arabic-speaking the local volunteers that we had taught them to read and write in Arabic, because a lot of them, even at 10, 12 years old, had not yet learned their own alphabet. And the kids were just like kids everywhere, so vibrant, so loving, run up to you every time, give you a hug, tell you about whatever exciting thing was happening in their family, and also had seen so much trauma. So often, like an 8-year-old child would just casually say something about, oh, well, when we were in Syria, and then tell this terrible story. And I think, man, this 8-year-old has seen more trauma in his 8 years of life than I will see in my entire life. And yet they're somehow normal, or they're somehow still functioning. The organization that I volunteered with was made up of volunteers from all over the world, 20 to 25 people at a time. And I did mostly the education, the teaching stuff, but they did food support and medical vans and had a lot of different operations going. And I was really impressed with the work that they did and made very close friends during my time there. Of the 20 to 25 volunteers that were there when I was the only Christian. And not only were the other volunteers not Christian, they were very vocally anti anything religion, anything to do with faith, kind of mocking and scornful of even the idea of there being a higher power. And yet here they were doing this hard work, living in the dust, living in the dirt, and like doing such heartfelt, beautiful work. And several times as we were sitting around the evening or in the beginning of the day having a meeting and dividing up tasks for the day, I'd look around at all these beautiful people and think, man, these people are so beautiful. They're doing God's work. Like, this is God's work, what he's called us to do, to protect the most vulnerable. They're doing God's work, even though they don't claim to know him. Where are the Christians? We should be here. This is what we've been called to do. We should be here en masse. And as I thought that, at the same time, I remembered every person I had spoken to before traveling. I thought, oh, Christians are staying safe. So throughout this time, I had been posting pictures on social media and sending email updates, and I got a lot of people were very interested and very engaged in what I was doing. I got a lot of responses every day. Overwhelmingly, my friends would write back and say, be careful, stay safe, stay safe, stay safe. And I told myself, Bethany, in our culture, this is how we say I love you. We care about someone, we want them to be safe, and so we tell them, stay safe, be careful, come home soon. But I started to feel really frustrated because I felt like I'm doing something really hard. I'm on the other side of the world. I'm living in really poor conditions. I'm seeing terrible things every day. I felt like for the first time in my life, I was seeing evil really close up, not in the people I was working with, but in the stories they were coming from. And I was genuinely really struggling with the things I was seeing. I was not doing well mental health-wise. And then everyone from home was just telling me, be safe, be careful, come home soon. And I thought, man, all these people writing to me, they're all Christians. They're all people of God. Why aren't these people of God encouraging me to be strong, to be courageous, to be bold, to be light in the darkness, to be hope for the hopeless? Because here's the thing. You can read the Bible cover to cover. You will never find Jesus telling his disciples to stay safe. He doesn't do it. He does not say, you are the light of the world and the salt of the earth, but stay safe. He does not say, go ye to all nations and preach the good news, but stay safe. He does say that you will face many trials and tribulations because of his name. Men will hate you because of his name. And the early Christians got that. The first disciples, most of them died violent deaths because of their faith. Many of them lived in constant danger because of their faith. And that's what it meant to be a Christian. Being Christian was radical, it was countercultural, it was not easy, it was not convenient, and it was not safe. And somehow, over the centuries, I think we've forgotten that. And it's become easier to be a Christian, it's become more convenient to be a Christian, and somehow our priority has become safe. I believe if you're following Christ with your life, you are called to be bold, to be strong, to be courageous, and to live outside of safe. So, I have a couple disclaimers with that. Yes, I believe we're called to live out of safe. I'm not advocating recklessness. I'm not saying that in order to be a real Christian, you need to seek out the most dangerous situation possible and put yourself there in order to test God or in order to prove your faith. Of course, there's a place for discernment, prudence, wisdom when taking on risks, but I also believe if you're following Christ with your life, personal safety should not be your first consideration when making a life choice. Disclaimer number 2, I think we are a diverse enough group this morning that there's probably someone here or multiple someones who has escaped a very dangerous or a life-threatening situation. That is a miracle. You are a miracle. I would never want you to think that I'm standing here telling you that you were not enough in that situation. When you have been delivered from a dangerous place by the grace of God and you're here in a safe place, hallelujah, I'm so glad that you found a haven here. Third disclaimer, this is going to look different for everyone. Not everyone in this building is called to work with refugees in a foreign country. In fact, probably most of you are not. But this living outside of safe can mean financial safety. Maybe it means trusting God to take a risk with your finances. Maybe it means social safety, doing something that your friends won't understand or won't think is cool. Or if you're a student in school, maybe this is as simple as being kind to the new kid who doesn't have any friends yet, doing something that is outside of your normal, outside of your comfort in trusting God. The Bible says, go to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel, preach the good news. I think most of us think ends of the earth, deepest, darkest jungle, Africa, Asia, Colombia. Someone at another church gave me this. I think they stole it from their child. But here's Jerusalem. So Jesus did his ministry in Israel, said those words in Israel. He said, go to the ends of the earth and preach the gospel. If we spin around, this is Bend, Oregon. You are at the ends of the earth. It took us 2,000 years, but we got here. When Jesus spoke those words, you are about as far away as you can get and still be on the same planet. And Jesus said, go to the ends of the earth. So you're here, and you happen to live in one of the most unchurched regions of our nation. There's a lot of work to do right here, and you've been called here to the ends of the earth. I believe Christians are called to live outside of safe, and it's going to look different for everyone here. I also have gotten to share this message with a variety of audiences, so I already know what you guys are going to say to me after this. Here are the responses that I get. Oh, that's so cool. I love what you're doing. Like, I'm too old now, of course, but that's great. You young people, you go change the world. No, you're not too old. Or I get, oh, that's so great. I love your story. I want to do what you're doing, but I'm still in school, so after I graduate, and then I'll get a job and save some money. And, oh, you're not too young. Oh, I'd love to do what you're doing, but I want to do it with someone, so I'll get married, and then my spouse and I will do it together. I would love to do what you're doing, but I'm married, so I can't. Friends, you are not too old. You are not too young. You are not too married. And you are not too single to live boldly for God. I'm going to say it again. You are not too old. You are not too young. You are not too married. And you are not too single to live boldly for God, in whatever that looks like for you. You have kids? Awesome. Take your kids with you. Show them what it looks like to live counterculturally, radically, different, weird, whatever that looks like for you and your family. Start them young. I'm going to leave you this morning with a verse from Joshua. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Thank you.